Watching TV has changed over time. Streaming has become the new norm. That's why Golden State Media Concepts television podcast dives headfirst to the world of cord cutting. Want to be on the loop of what's hot in Netflix? Or if it's not a preference, what about original shows in Hulu? We've got you covered. Join us as we fill in the blank and talk about movies to stream and what show you should be binging. This is the Golden State Media Concepts television podcast.
Hello and welcome to the GSMC television podcast. We're part of the mighty GSMC podcast network, and I'm your host, Howard Fletcher. Listen, I'm really glad that you could join me today. If you're a veteran listener, I want to welcome you back. I'm real appreciative of your listenership. You're the reason I keep coming back. If you're not a veteran, if you're new, thanks for giving me a try. I'm an acquired taste, so please stay and marinate a bit. And I think you're going to like it. I have a big show today. We're going to start with some breaking news on the coronavirus epidemic. I will share my thoughts on Tiger King, which is the most popular Netflix show right now. Unbelievable. I will explore WWE streaming, believe it or not, and that's a request from Stone Cold Coors Light. He's a listener from Columbus, Ohio. Thank you for the email. And I'm going to finish up, as usual, at least during this time, with a recap of episode 3 of the current season of Westworld on HBO. But right now, I'm going to go with some breaking news on Killing Eve. The third season of Killing Eve will arrive a little sooner than initially planned. AMC Networks will premiere the Emmy-winning series on April 12th, 2 weeks earlier than its planned April 26th date. The show that simulcasts on BBC America and AMC will help the latter fill in for a pair of Walking Dead series that were unable to finish production due to the coronavirus pandemic. And I got this quote from Variety. This season of Killing Eve digs deep psychologically, and with actors like Sandra Oh, Jodie Comer, and Fiona Shaw, the results are nothing short of astonishing. We literally couldn't wait for fans to see it, said Sarah Barnett. She's president of AMC Studios. The Walking Dead was unable to finish post-production on its season finale, which had been set for April 12th before the coronavirus pandemic shuttered hundreds of TV and film productions. The episode will air later in the year. AMC has also pushed the premiere of spin-off series Walking Dead: The World Beyond. I know you all are on your edge of your seats for that one, as post-production work on several episodes wasn't completed. I still have a question about what they're going to do to make The Walking Dead something different. But anyway, that's why I'm not making shows. More breaking news. ABC's Grey's Anatomy, one of the first TV series to shut down production amid the global coronavirus crisis, it's hard to say fast, will not resume work on season 16. Grey's, which this season bid farewell to one of its few remaining original stars, Justin Chambers, has already been renewed for its 17th season. Listeners to this show know I have never watched Grey's Anatomy, and I've asked people to email me at podcasthoward@gmail.com to let me know about Grey's Anatomy. If you are a Grey's fan, I want to know, why is it around for 17 seasons? I mean, I can't watch everything. I've always said that on this show. And so it's obviously a good show. I would think it was a good show, at least, to be around for 17 seasons. But why is it still being watched? You know, let me know. I'm curious. It remains unclear when any live action programming for next season will be safe to resume. Traditionally, returning shows resume filming in July. Most broadcast shows that were forced to shut down before completing work on their current seasons will, like Grey's, not go back into production anytime soon. Networks, studios, and producers will then be left to decide if remaining episodes will roll over to next season. Some shows will not likely return, as networks are currently scrambling to come up with short and long-term plans for their schedules amid a global pandemic, and no signs of when it will be considered safe to go back to work. While Grey's will not be able to complete production on its 16th season, those of you who are Shondaland fans, don't worry. Dramas Station 19 and the final season of How to Get Away with Murder have already been completed, and they will air their planned finales on May 14th. With series shut down for the remainder of the season, as I reported last show, and I want to say it again, Grey's Anatomy and Station 19 are among the medical shows that have donated medical equipment to local hospitals in a bid to help first responders with supplies, things like masks and gowns, at a time when they're needed the most. And I want to recognize them again for being conscientious enough to know when to hold them and when to fold them. And you needed to give this stuff up. Like I said, I was surprised that they are authentic. But since they are the real deal, they need to give it to people who really need them in these times. So I appreciate it. Some more breaking news about ratings during this corona reality. Television usage went up last week 8% over what it was in February. Now, does that surprise anybody? I thought 8% was kind of low. Okay, this is according to Nielsen. Well, they go on to say that might not seem like much, but this is the time of year that statistic usually goes in the opposite direction. With daylight savings time, usually it goes down. So for it to go up 8% when they already were at peak viewership, I guess, during the winter months, that's pretty good. Being a journalist myself, I thought that this was pretty interesting. Not surprising, but interesting. News programming is the biggest beneficiary of this uptick. In fact, if you're looking for a breakout coronavirus TV star, consider David Muir of ABC's World News Tonight or Lester Holt of NBC's Nightly News. Both broadcasts had larger audiences last week than anything shown in the primetime hours. 20 years ago, just for those of you who don't know, network news was considered to be on the brink of extinction. But during the month of March, or at least near mid-March, when we started having this social distancing thing happening, more than 32 million people each night tuned into these broadcasts. And this wasn't just ABC and NBC. I'm adding on CBS Evening News with Norah O'Donnell. They are in third place, but if you add those three, the major networks, or three, what used to be the terrestrial networks, broadcast networks together, 32 million people each night. That's unbelievable when I remember it was in the single digits 20 years ago. Other programs that reported or talked about the news hit milestones last week. CBS's Sunday Morning had its biggest audience last weekend since 1994. Face the Nation, biggest audience since 1991. ABC's The View had its most watched week since January of 2019. And that's the same for the Today Show. So, nobody likes to say, yay, we're in this coronavirus thing, great. But as a journalist and somebody who used to be out there reporting the news, or at least writing the news, it is very gratifying to see that, when people want to get information, especially in these days when news is often being accused of being fake and inaccurate, that they're going to these sources to get information, because more often than not, the news is giving you as good information as they can get. So, when I hear the term fake news, it sends, and my hackles come up. They do, because most times when you're talking about professional news organizations that vet their stories and double check their sources, when you get called fake news, it hurts. It angers you, actually. Well, let me not speak for my colleagues. It angers me. So, speaking of fake news, or what's real and not real, next I'm going to talk about what's been the most popular show on Netflix this week. You know what it is. It's Tiger King. And Tiger King is one of these documentary style miniseries that have become very popular on Netflix. They are quite entertaining to watch. Making a Murderer was one, and there have been questions about how credible some of that information was or is that was presented. So you always got to take these things with a grain of salt, although I do think that the filmmakers involved did the best they could, and I think that's the case with Tiger King. If Tiger King is absolutely on the level and nothing was doctored or spun in a way that made it overdramatic, overly entertaining, it is a crazy story, and truth is truly stranger than fiction. So we'll talk about Tiger King when I come back. Thanks for listening. Go get some refreshments, and I'll be right back. Don't go anywhere.
Want to know the latest and hottest music hitting the airwaves? Don't be left out. Listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Music Podcast. Keith keeps you on the loop with everything you need to know from pop, rock, hip-hop, and the top 40. And we'll throw in news of your favorite artists, concert and tour dates, and so much more. Listen no further, because this is the gold standard in music podcast.
Okay, I am back, and we are about to talk about Tiger King on Netflix. Folks, this is a crazy, crazy miniseries. It's a true crime miniseries that, and I'm going to tell you now, there are going to be some spoilers in this. I'm not going to try to, give you all the spoilers, but it's impossible to talk about this thing without talking about it. I highly recommend you watch this. If you like true crime, or if you just like to character studies of crazy stuff that's on Netflix, they are superlative in producing this type of miniseries. Tiger King follows the rise and fall of an eccentric Oklahoma zoo entrepreneur known as Joe Exotic.
Yes.
And folks, had this been a fictional story, I would have said that there's no way that this could have happened. No way. Joe, who was born Joe Schnovel. I can't even pronounce his name. It's so crazy. He does on the show, so watch it. Schreibvogel is his name, and he was born in rural Kansas. He is a gay, polygamous, gun-toting libertarian, if he has any real ideology at all, and he has a platinum blonde mullet, who for 2 decades, this guy owned and operated a small independent zoological park in Wynwood, Oklahoma. At one point, the 16-acre park boasted more than 100 tigers, as well as lions, bears, alligators, chimpanzees, and other exotic creatures.
Yes.
Visitors to the park paid for hands-on experiences with the wildlife, like they would pet the tiger cubs and take selfies with them and that type of thing. Now, this type of profiteering off of wildlife raised the hackles of an animal rights activist in Florida named Carol Baskin. And Carol's a doty, hippie-ish blonde who wears almost exclusively leopard print clothing. She is almost as eccentric as Joe Exotic, but it's hard to even compare anyone to Joe Exotic.
Yes.
Baskin, she also ran an exotic cat-themed bed and breakfast before launching what she calls Big Cat Rescue. That's a long story. I'm not going to go into it. You need to watch this, like I'm telling you. What she runs is a sanctuary, what she calls a sanctuary for abused animals. And she becomes hell-bent on using her energy and the millions of dollars that she inherited from her late husband, another long story, to end the private breeding of wild cats and to shut down Joe Exotic Zoo. And that's the main crux of this miniseries. That's the driving force, but there's so much more to it. What the story involves is a cast of oddballs living on the fringes of society. And it's including, but not limited to, and I'm just going to describe these people. One guy is like a big cat tycoon. He also has a park, a zoo. He may or may not be running a marriage cult from his property. You have another chain-smoking former news television reporter who moves to Joe Exotic Zoo to create a reality show that is ultimately doomed. You have a con man / swinger who takes over the zoo in a dastardly coup when he flips the script on Joe. A burly fall guy, a big guy, he looks like a middle-aged Chucky doll, literally, and he becomes a secret informant for the FBI. And there's a zoo employee who returns to work not even 2 weeks after a tiger rips off his arm. It's madness. There's another guy. He's another owner of exotic animals, of tigers, of big cats. This guy named Mario Tabro, and I believe I'm pronouncing his name correctly. Excuse me if I'm incorrect. But what's important about Mario is that Mario legitimately was the inspiration for Tony Montana and Scarface. And he talks about his actual crimes in between footage of him with big cats and also some press clippings of his escapades with the law and drug dealing. To give you some perspective about the scandalous figures who populate Tiger King and how crazy it is, Mario only appears for a few minutes. That's it. He could have a whole miniseries done on him alone. I mean, it's crazy that he's like such a small character in this milieu because it's crazy. Then there's the aesthetics of this story. You're in rural Southwest Americana. There's a bunch of tiger memorabilia everywhere, guns everywhere, bizarre facial hair. All this stuff is a gold mine for a true crime story. And many other stories would stay at the surface. But the thing about these people who made this documentary, they dig deeper. They seek to explore what kind of person would even own big cats. And who would give their life to someone who does? I mean, because many of these people who work here, they make nothing. They're pretty much just almost volunteers because they're getting paid close to nothing. It's crazy. There are no weak episodes in Tiger King. There are only 7, and that's probably why they're so strong. They didn't try to stretch this thing out to 10, or even I've seen some out to 12. They did it in a tight 7, and it goes bam, 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 each one. King Tiger establishes rich dynamics of possessiveness, of individual kingdoms that can be destroyed from the inside as well as the outside. This makes everyone's many backstabbings all the more vivid, especially as Joe later on has to fight for ownership of his own zoo while balancing his political aspirations. Let me repeat that. While balancing his political aspirations, because yes, Joe runs for President of the United States of America and for Governor of Oklahoma.
Yes.
On top of that, Joe's compound has a television studio, or a makeshift television studio, where he records his YouTube channel, Joe Exotic TV, which is still on YouTube. I would suggest you go take a peek at that. It boasts hundreds of videos. As of this recording, he has 105,000 followers, and it goes up every day, especially with this out. I wouldn't be surprised if he breaks 1 million in a month after this Netflix run. But it offers glimpses of Joe's life at his zoo. It's called the GW Zoo, including everything from animal feedings to videos of his presidential and gubernatorial candidate election speeches.
Yes.
Those are crazy. There are archives of his live broadcasts. He had a Joe TV that used to go on live, and it had a great following. And it has a public access feel. It is crazy. But among the videos, and I want you guys to go check this out. Joe, now this is the surprising thing. Joe Exotic has a pretty good voice. He records country music songs, which he writes. And, you know, I'm surprised that he didn't hang this up and decide to try to break into music. Now, maybe my ear isn't attuned to what would be marketable on the country western circuit because I'm not a big fan of country and western, but it sounds like he can carry a pretty good tune. And he wrote this song called Hey Kitty Kitty. And it's pretty hard to top. Now, Here Kitty Kitty is a country ballad, and in it he accuses Carol Baskin, that was the lady I mentioned earlier, he's having this feud with, of murdering her husband that she inherited those millions of dollars from when she was in her 20s. He accuses her of killing him and feeding him to her big cats. So, hence the name Here Kitty Kitty. In the video, Joe is dressed up like a priest. I don't understand what that's supposed to mean. He has on the collar, and he has a big black cowboy hat on. And he sings about how Carol's husband disappeared, and he has a woman who's a lookalike for Carol, feeding cats. Those are his caged cats in his place, meat off of a platter that's supposed to be her husband that she's feeding him. It is over the top, and it's just worth seeing. It's worth watching. That's all I'm saying.
Yes.
Tiger King exposes the underbelly of the big cat community that I didn't even know existed. Which, now the lines between loving wild animals, these big cats, these exotic animals, and exploiting them aren't really clear. There are people in this that say that they are preservationists and they do some things that I think are quite cruel to the animals. Then there are people who are just profiteering off the animals, and it's pretty easy to figure out that that's not cool. I think a zoo, by definition, is an animal jail. So you have to say, is anybody doing the right thing at all? However, they make the argument that these are endangered species, and there are more tigers in captivity right now than there are free in the wild. I give Tiger King 4.5 buckets of popcorn on my 5-point food scale. It doesn't get 5 only because some of the scenes with the animals are not everyone's cup of tea, so it's not a perfect show. I'll be back with a little bit more about Tiger King and then some more TV news after this. Take care.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Yes, yeah, I love potato chip sandwiches, I do. Okay, we are back. And I was just talking about Tiger King on Netflix. Unbelievable show. Gotta watch it if you can. I saw that Dax Shepard and Edward Norton were going back and forth on Twitter. They both want to play Joe Exotic when the biopic is filmed, if they ever film one. And this is so hot, I can't see them not making a movie or some sort of miniseries drama out of this. So that'll be interesting to see. But when I watch shows like this, and I have to say, I don't like to make this show political. I don't like talking all about race, but I am a black male American. And so, like most shows, I put myself in the situation, or I see how it could relate to my life, or could I even relate to the situation? And I'm watching Joe Exotic, and there's just a lot of stuff that I just, as a black male American male, I just can't relate to. Not because it's not it's just a different reality. Like number one, there was some in the black community in America. Most of the time, if there's generational wealth, it's because there have been some exceptional people in your family. They're either doctors or lawyers or exceptional business people who have done something. Now, granted, there were some good business plans in this show, but I just could not understand where all this money was coming from, because these folks did not seem super exceptional to me. So they just had access to capital that, in the black community is not as easily obtainable. I'll put it that way. But Joe, he did illegally. And so what I wanted to do in this little section, just real quick, is just somehow let those of you who are not in my demographic maybe relate to what I'm saying, just in a somewhat entertaining form. And that is just to imagine this if it was a docudrama, if you put other people in these positions, how much it just doesn't seem like it would work. And you may understand what I'm talking about. Joe illegally sold exotic animals, big cats all over the country. And he did it relatively openly for almost 20 years. I mean, he started doing this, I think they said 1999 or so. And it just was not very secretive. I mean, my God, the guy ran a cable show. So could you imagine and Joe is very, very outlandish. He stands out. So if you would, please imagine a brother who is dressed like Deion Sanders, driving around selling tiger and lion cubs to people. How long do you think he would get away with that? Oh, hell no. Not 20 years. Also, Joe ran a public access show to show off his compound. He had over 100 big cats, walked around with a gun on his hip. He would film explosions, shooting guns, and he would make open threats about what he would do to a blonde white woman in Florida named Carol Baskin. He even had a blow-up doll with sexual props that he would use on air to insult and harass her. So, if you would, could you imagine if, I won't even name anyone famous, just turn on YouTube and see if you can imagine, if you turned on and you saw any brother doing a video like that, how long it would be on YouTube, number one, and he would be a free man, number two. It just wouldn't happen. It wouldn't happen. This is just America. And that's just what I just want everyone just to get a little grip of this reality, because this is how I'm watching this show. You have a guy, Kevin Antle, Doc Antle as they called him. He's a polygamist. He is pretty much running a cult, but it's not just any old cult, because cults happen all the time. I mean, there are cults of all races and all demographics that you can think of. No, this cult curates big cats, and he also uses them, that he rents them out and consults on major Hollywood productions, while he continually brings in what look to be pretty close to underage women. They are right on the cusp. These are women who probably are legal within 12 months. So they're legal. But he's running pretty much a harem, as somebody on the show is described it, with dangerous exotic animals and all of the requisite armament that you would need and weaponry that you would need just to be safe around them. But it wasn't until the end of last year, according to the epilogue of the show, that they actually raided this place. And I just cannot believe that there would be somebody other than this guy who looks like Joe Antle, or I keep calling him Joe Antle, Doc Antle, who would be able to keep many wives and women and big cats on a compound without the government getting involved until they did just now. If Doc Antle looked like Ving Rhames, I don't know if he'd been able to last as long as he has. Finally, on this Tiger King thing, and that'll be I'll shut the door on it for at least for this episode. There was an article written by Sam Adams of Slate.com yesterday, and I'd mentioned in the last segment about Joe and how he can sing real well and all of that. Well, yes. Since recording that segment, here's what I just read. I'll just read it by Sam Adams. To begin with, the songs that are presented as Joe Exotics aren't. They were written and performed by Washington State's musicians Vince Johnson and Danny Clinton, whom the Clark County Columbian, which is a newspaper, flagged in 2010 as local artists to watch, because several of their songs were due to be featured in a movie called Nude Nuns with Big Guns, a cult classic. I just added that. According to Johnson, who answered questions via email, they connected with Exotic via an ad looking for someone to write a theme song for his private zoo, as well as the In the Works reality television show. And if you've seen Tiger King, you know what he's talking about. And what Johnson says is, he seemed like a dandy. It wasn't until months later, watching Joe's videos on YouTube, that I realized that Joe was going to do a Milli Vanilli on the songs and take full credit for them. Yes. So, as it turns out, Joe isn't such a great performer as I'd given him credit for. But he sure made it look real. I'll tell you that. I'll tell you, Tiger King just gets curiouser and curiouser. Again, I am going to recommend that if you have time and you have Netflix, that you at least give it a look, because I was flabbergasted watching this thing. And that's all I got to say about Tiger King. Howard says for about the 10th time. Watch it. Okay, enough of Tiger King. Time for some breaking news. Love Productions has says it's going to delay the filming on the 11th season of the Great British Bake Off as the UK grapples with the coronavirus pandemic. This is going to be bad news for my partner Joan. She loves this show. The Channel 4 show was due to go into production next month in its famous tent at Welford Park in Newbury, but producers want to make sure that the presenters, Baker and crew, are safe to film. A Love Productions spokeswoman said, "We continue to monitor the situation and follow the advice of Public Health England, and we will delay filming on Bake Off until it is safe to proceed." The Sky-owned production company has not put a time frame on the delay. It's not clear if a delay in production will result in a delay in transmission. Bake Off is filmed between April and July, with Channel 4 not usually premiering the show until the final Tuesday in August. In theory, that means a short delay might not have a big impact on Channel 4's scheduling plans. Bake Off streams on Netflix in the U.S. the same week that it broadcasts in the U.K. The show is known as the Great British Baking Show in America, and it has a cult following, like my partner Joan. I will have to keep my eye on this one. Next, I'm going to talk about something that I never would have bet that I would talk about. But we're in strange times. I mean, with this coronavirus thing and people having to stay in and be socially distanced, there is opportunity to watch some things on television that you normally wouldn't watch. Also, since I'm doing this podcast, which I didn't realize I would be doing until a couple of months ago, I knew that I would have to cover some things that I normally wouldn't watch. And this is something that I got an email about, and I told them that I would talk about it. So I found a list. I don't watch wrestling. I'm about to talk about wrestling, but there was a list that was on Collider of two gentlemen who wrote what they considered what to watch on the WWE network during this pandemic if you're new to wrestling and you want to get a little taste of what it's about. And I'm going to go over that list when we come back. Thanks for listening. If you do any drinking, you may need to pour yourself a stiff one for this next one. Talk to you soon.
Oh, hell no!
Want to find out what movies to go see? Then check out the GSMC Movie Podcast. It's your ticket to the latest movies, whether it's a new blockbuster event, romantic, comedy, or action flick. This show has got it all covered. They talk some what to go see now. Don't bother. What's hot on Netflix and everything in between. That's gsmcpodcast.com/movie-podcast. When it's all about the movies, it has to be this new show. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
Okay, now this is going to be some uncharted waters for me, and maybe most of you, or some of you at least. We're going to talk about wrestling. I got an email, like I said, which turned into a text, actually, from Stone Cold Coors Light. He's a listener from Columbus, Ohio, and he asked if I watched wrestling. I told him no, and he said, well, we should talk about something. So I went to Collider, which is a website about entertainment, and they have a television section, and two writers, Vinny Mancuso and Tom Ryman, wrote a list of wrestling shows, wrestling episodes. Not all of them are WWE, but most of them are. WWE now owns the world of wrestling, Vince McMahon. And these are all available through pay-per-view or on some streaming services. And they said if you were sitting around during the lockdown, during this great pandemic, and you want to look at some classic WWE episodes to get your, to dip a toe into it, if you're not familiar with it, or if you just want to relive some of your memories from the past, here are the wrestling episodes that they recommend. Number 1 would be, and these are in no particular order, WrestleMania 3. They say if you need an introduction to the idea of pro wrestling as an extra AF, you know what that means, spectacle, look no further than WrestleMania 3 at the Pontiac Silverdome, which held the record for the largest indoor event of all time for 22 years until it was surpassed by the Pope. Ricky the Dragon Steamboat versus Randy Macho Man Savage is one of the greatest matches of all time. Just 15 minutes of back and forth drama between two freaking workhorses in their prime. This next one, now let's call it number 2, is ECW Heatwave 1998. Before it got swallowed up by the WWE like every other wrestling promotion in the country, ECW made a name for himself by being completely S-house insane. The production values were criminally low. Every event was filmed in a tiny, overcrowded theater, thumbing its nose at every fire marshal in the state, and every wrestler on the roster looks like they might legitimately kill each other at any moment. Heatwave 1998 is ECW at its peak counterculture glory. This sounds like the venue my boy Randy the Ram, Mickey Rourke's character on The Wrestler, where he used to wrestle. King of the Ring 1998, same year. The main event of King of the Ring was a first blood match between Stone Cold Steve Austin and Kane. That is the Undertaker's brother, if I'm not mistaken. I know that much about wrestling. They write that match is fine, but the real reason to put this pay-per-view on is the Hell in a Cell match between Mankind and the Undertaker, my boy. It's easily one of the most brutal matches in wrestling history, and it kicks off with Mankind being thrown off of the steel cage and falling nearly 20 feet through the Spanish announcer's table. Somehow he climbs back up into the cage, only to be chokeslammed, that, only in wrestling, through it, down into the ring. Footage of this match is also in the documentary Beyond the Mat, highlighting the fact that Mankind actually lost consciousness after falling through the cage. No kidding. And one of his teeth got knocked out and wound up in his nostril. It's arguably the most famous match of the past 20 years because of the huge bumps Mankind takes. Bumps. That sounds mild. Okay, WCW, the Great American Bash, 1989. Late 80s seemed to be like the hot time as far as these guys are concerned. The headliner is Ric Flair. Also was the subject of a 30 for 30 documentary on ESPN, and you should watch that. And Terry Funk, two genuinely insane individuals who spent long careers going balls to the wall 7 nights a week. Elsewhere on the card is the absurdly popular Sting, not of the Police, before he started listening to 9 Inch Nails and hanging out of the rafters. He takes on the deadly, mist-spitting Great Muta, probably the most talented person on this entire show. WrestleMania 15. Without hyperbole, these guys write, WrestleMania 15 might be the greatest sporting event in human history. The main event features The Rock, who is ubiquitous now, and Stone Cold Steve Austin battling for the WWE Championship for the first time. It's an all-time great match, and it's hard to overstate its impact, but I'm going to because there's another match on this card that deserves your eternal attention, and that's the Brawl for All boxing match between Bart Gunn and Butterbean. Let me describe that one to you. Butterbean punches Gunn so hard that his soul evacuates his body. And this happens in less than 40 seconds. This gentleman writes, Tom Ryman, I've watched this match no less than 100 times in my life, and it never gets less entertaining. Watch this pay-per-view right now before you do anything else. I don't care if you're driving, pull over. It's your duty as a citizen of the world. Well, Tom, I'm not going to stop doing this podcast to watch that, and I probably won't ever watch it, but if you like wrestling and I'm going to take these guys' word for it. I like Collider's a good website. And if you want to spend some money on some wrestling, according to Tom Ryman, WrestleMania 15 is one of the ones you want to put your money down on. Monday Night Raw, January 4th, 1999. The funny thing about this entry is that a solid 85% of it is comprised of some of the dirt worst aspects of WWF's car crash attitude area trashiness. We've got miscarriages. We've got homophobia. We've got Dennis Knight just sort of chained up to a saw trap in the basement somewhere. But that episode also happens to end on one of the greatest, most emotional televised professional wrestling moments of all time. I bet you I won't get choked up on it, but this guy did. The main event sees Mankind, a lovable loser who lives in boiler rooms and spent a good portion of his career being flung onto concrete and or barbed wire, getting a shot at the title held by The Rock. It's the type of underdog story non-scripted sports would kill for, and the payoff is everything wrestling can be when pulled off perfectly. Whatever rocks your boat. Royal Rumble 1999. This pay-per-view is infamous for the I Quit match between The Rock and Mankind, in which The Rock repeatedly smashes Mankind in the head with a steel chair, as featured in the documentary Beyond the Mat. It's one of the all-time greatest wrestling events, if not the greatest, so you owe it to yourself to watch it immediately. Dude, I wonder if he really realized that he wrote that one of the all-time greatest wrestling events is when Mankind gets constantly beaten in the head with a steel chair. Wow. WrestleMania 17. Considered by many fans to be the greatest WrestleMania ever, the main event has Stone Cold Steve Austin once again wrestling The Rock. The Rock is in here for the WWE Championship. Arguably, the highlight of the show is the tables, ladders, and chairs tag team match between the Dudley Boys, Edge, and Christian, and the Hardy Boys. Three of the best tag teams ever, walloping the absolute Christ out of each other with furniture is a total blast to watch from start to finish. And last but not least, WrestleMania 18. Now, understand, WrestleMania 18 is creatively spelled with a Roman numeral 10 and the number 8, like X8. Okay. WrestleMania 18, stylized X8 because the early 2000s were a wild time, is the easiest pay-per-view to recommend to a wrestling newbie thanks to one match, Hulk Hogan versus The Rock. As a bonus, for anyone coming in because of the Icon versus Icon match, there are a ton of gems on the undercard too, including one of the best ever sells of the Stone Cold Stunner, which was, I guess, Stone Cold Steve Austin's move where he pretends to knock somebody out, and he says it's courtesy of Scott Hall, who I've never heard of. So that is the list. Hopefully, for those of you who are at home, who are interested in wrestling or want to go back and relive those episodes, I gave you a little taste of or a reminder of what you could choose from. Please email me at podcasthoward@gmail.com. Let me know what you think. And if there's any other type of shows that you want me to go over during this time we are on lockdown. And Stone Cold Coors Light, I want to thank you for the recommendation, and I hope I did it some justice. I'm just not a wrestling fan. I told you that from the beginning. Next, I'll have some late-breaking Corona news, and then, last but not least, we're going to talk about that episode 3, Westworld. Don't go away. I'll be right back.
Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast. Together we dive into the world of sci-fi and science fiction. From episodes of Star Trek, Star Wars, to The Walking Dead, Resident Evil, all the hot new science fiction movies from the backdoors of Marvel or DC. The Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast. You'll never look at science fiction the same way again.
Okay, all right. I am back. Ow, that's so hot tea. I said I was going to come back with some breaking news, but the news is all bad. We're talking about coronavirus, COVID-19, way too much. So, even though this is in that vein, I thought I would come up with a list of some recommendations of shows that you can stream during this time while you're being socially distanced and hanging out in your house. So here are the recommendations. They're in no particular order. Some of these you can probably guess because if you know me, you know what I'm going to say. Others we'll talk about. Okay, first, I just put Game of Thrones because Game of Thrones is nice and long, and it's backed by a big budget by HBO. It might be the most spectacular thing ever that was put together for television. You got all kinds of costuming, special effects, battle scenes. It's really good. They usually end every episode with some sort of cliffhanger that makes you want to go to the next one. It's really easy to binge. Next on my list is True Detective, but I'm only recommending season 1. Season 1 took place in Louisiana. It was about 2 troubled men investigating a crime over a period of time, played by Matthew McConaughey and Woody Harrelson. Both of them played the hell out of those roles. The story weaves its way through horrors committed by a gentleman referred to as the Yellow King. That's not a spoiler. And it also zeroes in on the complicated relationships between the 2 leads, the 2 detectives. It ultimately pulls together in a Southern Gothic type of situation, and it's a very good binge. After that, I liked season 2. I enjoyed season 3, but they weren't riveting. I don't know what they're like to binge. I saw them week to week during their regular broadcast. The next one on my list is Stranger Things. That's streaming on Netflix. Now, I didn't watch it. I never did. Well, no, let me take it back. I watched the first 2 episodes when it first came out, when the first season came out. See, the thing with me is that I'm not a fan of the child-driven plot. That's probably why I don't like Stand By Me or the It movies. I'm a fan of the It book. I like Stephen King, those movies just don't grab me. So all I'm going to say is that people whose taste in television that I really respect, they like it, and they say it's really good. So I'll greenlight it for you all. You can maybe binge Stranger Things. Email me at podcasthoward@gmail.com. Tell me what you think. Next on my list is Breaking Bad. That's also on Netflix right now. Now, I've already said that I think Breaking Bad's in my top 3 of TV shows of all time. Binging Breaking Bad can be like an emotional marathon, but the payoff is well worth it. And it's a masterpiece in long format storytelling. It was obvious that Vince Gilligan and Peter Gould, who were the creators, thought this story out. And so it's a masterpiece. It's a series that veers left every time you think it's going to go right. And you think you have a read on it, but you don't. And it's never afraid to swing for the fences with despicable human behavior and the far-reaching fallout from wicked deeds. Nobody is safe in Breaking Bad. Walter White, who's played by Bryan Cranston, I have said on the show, and I'll always say, he's one of the best characters ever written and developed for television in history. Next one on my list is Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Again, a show that I never watched. Joss Whedon reinvented the rules of television genre when this came out. I remember when Buffy came out, though, it was pretty groundbreaking. And people who I didn't expect to be fans of the show were fans of the show. And my friend Valerie, whose taste in television I respect, she swears by Buffy. So if that's the case, I'll give it the green light for you guys. And when I have her on the show again, I will ask her to defend her position on Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I need to sit down and watch it, and I may take this time to do it. It's on Hulu right now, by the way. Next show I'm going to recommend is Twin Peaks. You all know the David Lynch landmark network television series, and you certainly have enough time now to watch it at home. You don't need much more reason to watch the series except for to say that it was historic television. Now, if you don't like David Lynch movies, if you just really don't like David Lynch movies, then probably don't look into this. But if you enjoyed Eraserhead, or if you enjoyed Wild at Heart, or Lost Highway, or Mulholland Drive, or any of those, you should certainly look into Twin Peaks. I thought it was a good show. Next on the list, Battlestar Galactica. Again, a show that I have not gotten around to watch. But I know this much. Every time a new decent science fiction show surfaces, gets created, it somehow is derivative of Battlestar Galactica. Everybody I know who knows about the sci-fi genre talks about Battlestar Galactica, and when you read reviews of things, Westworld is a good example of shows that are highly driven by sci-fi. Somehow Battlestar Galactica ends up in that review, and it's just a show I think that if you really want to call yourself a sci-fi fan, you should say that you've seen at least a few episodes. I need to get on it. So, speaking of being derivative of Battlestar Galactica, Westworld is the next one on my list. Westworld is, as you know, next segment, we're going to review episode 3 of this season. It's set in an old West theme park, at least when it starts off, season 1, where the robots are at human disposal to do whatever dark urges they may possess. Westworld is pretty much a pitch perfect hybrid of like a pulpy fantasy and cerebral sci-fi. You know, it has HBO's signature sex and death spectacle. So it's something for everybody. Has a lot of brain twisters, a lot of twists and turns. You really have to pay attention to what's going on with it. And if you really want to appreciate the show, you should watch it twice. So if you like sci-fi, you have to watch Westworld. Certainly have enough time to do it. Here's one from my partner Joan. Here's a high recommendation for Broadchurch. Now I'm just going to read this little blurb about it because it's a show that I haven't seen. She loves it. It's on Netflix right now. A young boy in a quiet English coastal town goes missing and is then found dead on the beach. From there, the villagers of Broadchurch see all their worlds turned upside down by the investigation into the killer who belonged to this tight-knit community. Broadchurch's success, at least in its first season, is in the way its crime story comes second to the character drama it dives into, thanks to an exceptional cast. From the 2 sparring detectives, played by David Tennant and Oscar-winning Olivia Colman, to the grieving mother, Jodie Whittaker, trying to pull her family back from the brink. The series' picturesque setting is juxtaposed sharply with the darkness within it, leading to a shocking and brutal conclusion that should have ideally ended the series. And that's what Joan said, that season 1 should have been the end of the series, but, you know, they want to ride the horse. Another show I've never watched before, Rick and Morty, animated series. Again, some people say that Westworld is highly derivative of Rick and Morty. I can't say. I know people I respect like it. I'm going to green light it. That's on Hulu, by the way. Marcella, which is on Netflix, is an excellent BBC drama, and it's excellent for binging. I'm not going to say it's an excellent show. This is the difference here. A lot of the shows that I've recommended, I think, are excellent shows. Marcella has flaws, but it is made for binging. It is perfectly paced, and it doesn't give you enough time to realize how ridiculous the plot is. Anna Friel, who is the star, I find her just in some ways captivating to watch. She's really interesting actress, and she really keeps it driving. So it's worth the binge if you want something that you don't want to, you just want to be entertained. It is a detective murder type mystery, BBC British detective drama. I was entertained. Last but not least on my list is The Wire. You all know I think The Wire is the greatest television show ever made. So I would just say, while you have the time to sit down and watch a few episodes, you need to get at least 4 or 5 under your belt before you come to a decision about it. I think you'll like it. I highly recommend you take the time to give it a peek. 7 shows I didn't have time to describe that are on the list are Futurama, Gossip Girl, The Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt, The West Wing, Happy Valley, Fleabag, and Russian Doll. As I always say on the show, you don't have time to watch everything, but if you didn't like those I described earlier, look at that list I just gave you, and maybe you'll find a gem in there. Next, you know what's coming. Westworld, Season 3, Episode 3, entitled Absence of Field. Thanks for listening. Go grab a cold one, and I'll be right back.
Are you tired of the same old news? Are you sick of the seemingly endless political spin and negativity? The GSMC America Still Beautiful podcast is a weekly news podcast covering all the top positive and uplifting news stories. We cover stories that will inspire, uplift, and remind you of the good in the world. Tune into the Golden State Media Concepts America Still Beautiful podcast to get all the great and positive news stories of today. Download the GSMC America Still Beautiful podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Okay, all right, I'm back. And we are going to talk about Westworld. Episode 3 was good. I am feeling very positive now. Last week I was feeling kind of shaky about this season. I just didn't know what they were going to do. It got kind of corny. This episode moved back to that Westworld feel, and I really appreciated that. So I'm just going to start. I don't know where this is going to go. I'm going to give you a little recap, and I'll tell you my opinion about certain things, and we'll leave it at that. There are going to be spoilers here, so if you haven't watched the episode, I recommend you turn this off, go watch the episode, and then please come back. Okay, at the beginning of the episode, we've kind of flashed back to season 2, and we see Charlotte Hale, and I'm assuming this is the human Charlotte Hale, leaving a message in a bot or in a host. She thinks she's going to die. You hear a lot of gunshots behind her when the hosts were rebelling in season 2. Then the scene opens up with Dolores waking up the host, Charlotte. We still don't know who is inside this body or what control unit is inside this body. And they don't reveal it in the episode, but I will tell you who I think it is later in the episode. That was a cold open. So then after the opening credits, we see one of those I'm going to call them Roboho circles. It says elevated scrutiny in San Francisco. So I assume this is because Charlotte Hale is doing things that the Rehoboam sees as being odd. Charlotte Hale is shown a battle robot, looks very much like a transformer. I'm sure they're going to come into play later on. She is informed that somebody is buying Delos stock, and they've bought up 38% of the company, which is a controlling interest. They don't know who it is yet. Caleb helps Dolores escape from the ambulance people. Well, she was in the ambulance, as you know. She was shot at the end of last episode. But the ambulance is intercepted by police that aren't really police, and Caleb helps her escape. It appears that Sarek is buying the stock. Charlotte's assistant comes and explains that they don't know, they didn't know who it was, but now they've identified it as Sarek. And she called her a black hole because he's the richest man in the world, but they can't find out anything about him, except for he was able to buy the stock undetected. He's a complete mystery. So, we see Charlotte's life. She goes back home, sees her ex-husband. His name is Jake. As an aside, I'd like to say proudly that Jake is played by Michael Ealy, who is an alumnus of Springbrook High School and the University of Maryland, both schools that I attended. That's about it about Michael Ealy. He had a very small role. The biggest point in that scene is that we find out that Charlotte actually has a life and that she has a son named Nathan. And apparently she has not been very present in this boy's life because she is a slave to her job, or she's consumed by her job, not a very good mother. During this scene, I will say that the Charlotte host, after she sees Jake, hugs him and embraces him. They have this very short-lived, hot and heavy kissing scene. And that ties into who I think might be inside of that body. But moving on, Charlotte Hale, host, finds out from her security people that there are some missing control units when they did an inventory after the uprising in the park. She learns that one of the control units that's missing is Maeve's, and also that there's a mole in the Delos board who possibly has been siphoning off information, probably behind the theft of these control units. The control unit inside the Charlotte Hale's body is not having a good time. They're not dealing with it very well. She is self-harming. She's poking and cutting the flesh. She tells Dolores that she doesn't understand why, in the opening scene, she doesn't know why she has to be in this body. She said, why can't I be like you in your regular body? She was surprised when Dolores gave her a mirror and she figured out she was Charlotte Hale. She said, why do I want to be Charlotte Hale? She tried to kill all of us. Why can't I be myself? So I'm not quite sure, and they didn't get into why she's having these problems in the body. It seems to be deeper than just not wanting to be in that body, almost like a rejection, very similar to James Delos, his control unit rejecting his body when they were trying to somehow make him a host, or make a host body that could take a human consciousness. It's not quite on that same level, but it's something is going on. We'll learn more, I'm sure, in the future. She says she can't stop. And Dolores is very kind of frustrated by this. She says, you sound like them, like a human. You should be able to control this. She doesn't understand it. Now, it's here that I'll say that there are two schools of thought about who can be, in my mind, three actually, who can be inside Charlotte Hale. The most popular one I'm hearing is that they think that it could be Dolores' father, Peter Abernathy, or Teddy. I'm dismissing that because apparently the big reveal, or one of the big reveals for this season, is who is Charlotte Hale, who's inside of that body. That would be ho-hum. It'd be pretty obvious. I think it is either Dolores has split her personality between Wyatt and Dolores, Wyatt being the bad killer that Robert Ford created, and Dolores, who's like the farmer's daughter. And I think that Charlotte Hale is the daughter, the Dolores part of that personality, and the Dolores host is the Wyatt part of that personality. And I think they're the one and the same person. The other one that is interesting, which could, I don't know, it still has to be revealed, but it could be Caleb. And somehow, now I know they said they weren't going to do any type of messing with timelines and that type of thing, but I just think that somehow Caleb is not in his body anymore at the time that we see Charlotte Hale. And I also believe that Caleb might have had a relationship with his compatriot, the guy who, what is his name? Francis, that died. And so he, if that's the case, then that means he is gay. And also Michael Ealy looks a lot like Kid Cudi, so similar to Kid Cudi, who played who I'm suggesting might have been his partner or lover. And so that would explain why he might have had that reaction to Jake from State Farm. Now, Jake, when he came in and saw him, when he was in Charlotte Hale's, apartment as Charlotte Hale. So, well, I just fell down a rabbit hole there. So I'm running out of time. So I'm just going to cut this short by saying Dolores has recruited Caleb. It's going to be interesting to see where that goes. But I'm very, very excited about this season once again to see where it is going to go, because I was not happy with episode 2. Episode 3, it seems like they got their mojo back. Westworld is back. I have some interest in these characters. Maybe I'm just tired of being in the park, and I like being out here in the real world because I think it's much more interesting. I'm interested to see who Martin is now, who is in the security guy. Chibs is what I call him from Sons of Anarchy, the Scottish guy, who's in that body. I think that the top contenders are either Angela, even though she got blown up. It's obvious you can put these control units back together. Clementine, or maybe even Lawrence, who was hanging out with the Man in Black a lot last season. I tend to think it's Angela, just because Angela seems to be very competent as a person to take care of business, and in the way that Martin seems to be taking care of business. So that's it for this episode. We can go into more detail next episode. I want you to email me at podcasthoward@gmail.com. podcasthoward@gmail.com. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know your predictions. I will read all emails on the air. I really want to hear from you. Also, I'd like to thank you for listening. This has been the GSMC Television Podcast, part of the mighty GSMC Podcast Network. If you would, please go and rate this. Give us a 5-star rating on iTunes or wherever you listen, but iTunes is the most effective. We'd really appreciate it. Would you please subscribe? It'll really help us out. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. My name's Howard Fletcher. You can follow me at FletchDC on Twitter. And please, be careful out there. Be safe. Wash your hands. And we'll get through this. And in the meanwhile, watch TV and listen to my show. Thanks a lot. I'll see you on Friday. Take care. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Television Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.